the outsider. And at various points in the book, there's one voice called the voice of the black eye. And then there's the eye of the black voice. So it's an attempt to bring an other perspective on the whole notion of not only how to tell history, but what history is. And I think this book, or I hope it to a degree, is a kind of history of history. And so it is an attempt to be outside of the traditional way of not only doing that, but what I see as a derogatory kind of pulse in what it does. Bishop Megan George.
Professor Harris, I feel like I'm in class again. I'm taking notes. It's just wonderful. I have a twofold question. I think that your work interfaces very well with trauma studies and thinking about the way the irony, writers from oppressed groups have used irony sort of to filter their experiences. So I know definitely that's part of Jewish literature.
Right.
But African American literature, that's maybe a different spin, and we're seeing that, maybe with the known world in this book. I can't wait to delve into it. So that's my first.
But I think irony really is its basis of African American art. It has to be.
Comedy, irony.
Right. I mean, we can talk about that, over coffee if you want to buy me lunch or whatever.
The other question is about the decisions about visuals. You have some. I just flipped through my copy really quickly because I just got it. But some of the pictures are very iconic and appear in many history books of the period. How are you using the visuals or the portraits?
First of all, there was one we could get free. And I mean, in the original manuscript, I did have images, and then once it went to the press, it was encouraged that we use them. And again, I was just trying to give the book a different look and feel somehow. And I'm not sure that I can define it at this moment any more than that, but I did want something to break up the page, the line. Again, it's written in a kind of poetic line, so that it has a different feel on the page, hopefully, than the normal history book. And I wanted it to just feel. It kind of adds, I think, to the overall rhythm of the page and this whole notion of syncopation, which is a big concept in the book, how the original kind of rhythm in America is just a militaristic 4/4 beat. And then what happens when African Americans come into this is it just breaks all of that up. With syncopation, with, I mentioned ragtime, there's a longer section on ragtime, and that Murbridge was like the first ragtime photographer. But it just breaks up that whole notion of that strict kind of 4/4 beat that is somehow endemic to Euro-Americans. And you get these black people who come in and just, from the roots, begin to screw that notion up. It's just this simple. Life is not just that simple. I mean, it's great for military, it's great for moving masses of people, because this whole other thing that African Americans bring to this in terms of their understanding and interpretation and influence. George.
Yeah, it just reminded me that history in high school was not about anything I wanted to know about. And when I fell in love with things, then I became interested in their history.
Right.
So like in high school, I was already really in love with jazz, and I learned history through jazz.
Right. Yeah.
And through other things that I wanted to know about because I cared about them.
Yeah.
And I don't remember very much of history in high school being anything interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of why I brought James Brown in that little section that's there, talking about the railroad and hard working, whatever, and hardest working man. And there are those instances of people who just out of context are there, but who are often musical figures who again bring this other spin to it, bring this other kind of feel or reality to it. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask if you have any, based on your comments about meter and the militaristic workforce and whatnot versus what became have any comments about natural meters, natural rhythms, the languages that were native to various people, such as, again, native African languages, European languages, and then I guess to a lesser extent, Aboriginal American languages?
Walter just explained. I grew up on the east side. I think you do hear, I mean, again, you get into cliches and stereotypes, but you do hear people speak the way people speak according to the kind of music that they grew up with. Again, I think we would have to have lunch and talk about that. But I am aware of all that, and I think, particularly the created white character. Again, one of the things I wanted to do with the book was play with language in a way that I couldn't in most other circumstances in which I write. And the dialogue of some of the creative characters, I think, speak to some of that. There's a shoe, I don't know if it's in this book, it's in here, where at the World's Fair of 1893, there's this character that I created called I Am Wellborn. And it kind of represents the upper classes, and he sees all of this change happening, and it scares him to death. And there's a kind of moment where he goes and he gets a shoe shine. And there's this black boot, with shiny shoe, and in this almost voodoo-ish way, shines a rhythm into his shoe. So when the guy leaves, he's speaking this one language, but he kind of stumbles and doesn't know why or what has gotten into him. So, and again, that's not specific, but I feel what you're saying. It's a wonderful question. If I had a wonderful answer, Keith.
I just had a question about a comment about history repeating itself. And I guess it was Karl Marx that said that it does in two acts. The first act is a tragedy, the second act is a parody. You see any hope after your version of history?
I think progress of some sort is made. I mean, again, I think we're in a period, not to get into politics here, but we're in a period where we're at the possibility of a kind of backslide. And I think we're about to backslide to the 50s and start down over again. And I think our children or grandchildren will go through the 60s. I mean, essentially what's happened now is we're still arguing the realities of the 60s. There's some people who didn't want it to happen in the first place, and da-da-da. So we possibility of going back to a very conservative period that will kick off another radical kind of thing. So whether that's progress or not, I'm not sure. I think the wheel turns. If the whole thing moves forward or not, I'm not sure. But being at the age I am, I've seen most of this stuff happen before, and then looking at history with some kind of wider eye, you see how stuff just repeats itself. Again, my grandmother, if not to use Obama as the example of here, but if she could she have seen that? Maybe in her dreams. But this is a woman who, to show how short American history is, I was essentially raised by my grandmother, who was raised by her grandparents, who had been born slaves. That's what we have. This is how short American history is. So, talk about progress in this short period. If you want to talk about progress, ask somebody who's been around, Chinese or whatever. And they're still through whatever the hell they're doing. They try to imitate us. So is that progress?